Hello and welcome to the Association of Fundraising Professionals, How to Identify and Talk with Major Donors webinar. Our speakers today are Philip Schumacher and Timothy Logan. Philip Schumacher currently serves as the Executive Director of Gunderson Lutheran Medical Foundation, and Timothy Logan is Vice President and Senior Consultant of the Planned Giving Services and Nonprofit Healthcare Fundraising for Ruffalo Cody. Tim, the floor is all yours.
Thank you and good afternoon. Today, Phil and I are going to divide our presentation into two sections to cover the following objectives for today. We're going to cover this as a progression as to starting with your data file and looking into your data file to how to identify major donor prospects, and we'll touch on wealth rating and other data techniques that you can use to identify those major donor prospects in your data file. Then we'll look at some techniques to determine, once you've identified those major donor prospects through using data, which major donor prospects should you reach out to. At that point, we'll take some questions about the data and the identification portion of identifying major donor prospects. And then Phil is going to talk about how you should talk with those major donor prospects. He's going to cover some tips for getting an appointment, and then some strategies on how to manage the major donor process. Phil then will also discuss some benchmarks for your major donor program and visits in your major donor program. So that's what we're going to be talking about and covering in the next hour and a half, and there'll be plenty of time for questions, both in my presentations and in Phil's presentation, and then at the end of the web conference. We want to start with looking at using enhanced data. We all have data in our file, but there are enhanced data services that we can use, and we want to cover wealth information and also some scoring models. The first question that we want to ask ourselves when we are trying to identify major donor prospects is we want to look at our annual giving behavior. We want to look at the behavior of those individuals who have chosen to donate to us. What file analyses can we use so that we can identify major donor prospects? Well, there's two basic types of information that we want to know. Number one is affinity. Is there any way that we can use giving behavior and contact behavior with our organization to determine if donors really love us? What is their affinity? And also measures of ability. Are they wealthy? Do they have assets? When we think about affinity, if it's about loyalty and passion, we're trying to find out how loyal they are to your organization compared to other organizations. And how much passion do they have for your organization, and also eventually for your specific case, for the project or for the reason you're going to be asking them to make a major gift. So when we look at it from a data perspective, if it's about building a relationship, how do we measure the strength of that relationship? And that's what we want to look at the data so that we can learn to see through giving behaviors and other contact behaviors of our donors. How strong is their relationship with our organization compared to other organizations? And of course, for measures of ability, do they have wealth? Do they have assets? Are they able to make the size gift that we hope and want them to make? In short, we need to be able to use data analysis to look at the total donor relationship. So thinking about analyzing the file, it's important to keep a couple of things in mind. These are kind of top-line data rules. The biggest predictor of planned giving is frequency of annual fund giving. It doesn't matter about the size of the gift. It's how often does a donor give. That is the biggest predictor of whether or not a donor is a good planned giving donor prospect. For major gifts, what we're talking about today, the size of the gift is the single largest predictor of future large gifts. And there was a study done several years ago out of the University of Virginia where they looked at the size of the first gift and then went back and looked years later at subsequent giving behavior. And there was a direct correlation between the donors who made a larger first gift, a gift in excess of $100, to those that went on to become major donors in excess of $25,000. So there's statistically inferable data that shows that the larger the initial gift, the more likely the donor is to go on and become a major donor. So the proverbial, if you're going to remember one thing as you're going in to analyze your data, when you're looking for major gifts, gift size certainly is important. There are several donor rating systems that are in the marketplace today. I just want to touch on a few of them. One of them is a basic point system, a linear point system, and that is where you would assign relative scores to different donor behaviors. I don't think that, I want to make sure we don't get caught in the trap of thinking that this is just giving history. We go back to the question, if we're going to measure the strength of the relationship, how do we do it? For a donor rating score, we want to take into account activities and contact histories with the organization other than giving. Giving can play a large part of it. You may want to give score for the frequency of gifts, the total lifetime giving, and assign scores for that. But you also want to look at what activities do donors participate in your organization where you can say that means that they're loyal to us. For a university, it could be they attended their reunion, they purchased season tickets. For a national service organization, it could be that in addition to donating money, for the Red Cross, it could be they donate blood. For a literacy organization, it could be they volunteer to read. If you're a museum, it could mean they're a docent. So you know what separates donors and volunteers who are committed to your organization from those that aren't. And so you want to assign a point value to that. Then you simply add up the scores, and that gives you a relative ranking and measure of affinity. It's not perfect, but if you apply it uniformly across a database, it enables you to look at a large number of donors and assign points and develop a segment or a cohort that you want to either do further research on or assign to major gift officers for a portfolio. There's a pyramid system that is John Brown and Associates. They advocate a pyramid system, looking at it similar to a point system, but looking at this on a multidimensional approach. And then a passion index, which is a little bit tougher because that is designed to capture every contact that a donor has with your organization. It's 360 enterprise-wide data capture, which is difficult for most organizations. For example, one of the measures of the passion index, which by the way is developed by, I believe it's Epsilon now that purchased the firm that developed this passion index. Gentleman's name is Charles Longfeld. If you voluntarily, if a donor, or you, if you think of yourself, if you voluntarily tell a nonprofit organization that you have an address change, that would be part of the passion index. If you care enough about an organization to say, I've moved, then you are telling them that you care about them. You want them to be able to find you. My alma mater has tracked me down 7 times. I've never told them that I've moved. But my church and some other organizations, when I move, I make sure to let them know. So donor rating scores are important for when you're looking at your database of annual fund giving. It's important both for planned giving and for major giving that you have some way to assign value to affinity, which is the purpose of donor rating scores, because giving history is fairly easy. It's captured on your database. You can count the number of gifts, and we'll talk about what's important to look at for giving history. But to capture affinity, you want to make sure that you're looking at some other behaviors besides giving. This is from Jerry Panos, and I believe this chart, which is a 9-square chart on both axes, is a practical application of a donor rating score. If we look at the left-hand axis, that is labeled, the left-hand axis is labeled financial capability. And you see here it's a 9-point scale from low, which is a 1, to high. So then look at the x-axis, and this is the current interest or involvement level. And here Panos has divided it up into four different sections. 1 through 3 would be those donors that you want to identify. 4 and 5 are those who have interest. 6 and 7 are those that you are involving, and 8 and 9 are those that are investing. So Panos suggests that your top prospects start at 5-5. They're midpoint on the financial capability scale, and they have some interest in your organization. The ideal prospect is a 9-9, high financial capability, and they're invested in your organization. So going back to donor rating scores, this is a way to rate and rank donors and put them in some type of ordinal ranking. This is two-dimensional that will help you decide who you want to talk to, who you want to spend your time talking with, where they're at in the process, and ultimately who you want to ask for a major gift. So now if we have a data file and we assume that we have more annual fund donors than we're going to have major donors, how do we do segmentation for gifts? So if you are working with your annual fund person and say, well, we have all these donors who give to us on an annual basis, I'd like to find some major donor prospects in the file. Could you help me do that? I think what you and your annual fund person or your data analyst would want to talk about is what type of gift are you asking for? There's age-based gifts and there's wealth-based gifts. We won't spend a lot of time on age-based gifts today because those are more planned gifts, bequest gifts, charitable gift annuities, and retirement assets, although retirement assets certainly could figure into a major gift. But let's focus on the wealth-based gifts, a trust, a donor-advised fund, a stock gift, or probably what most of us are thinking about today, an outright cash gift. So as we look at messaging to potential major donors, we want to make sure that we're segmenting for wealth-based gifts. Age does play a part in it. If we look at this table, this table is from Kent Dove, and you notice that age does play a part in major giving. We see here Dove suggests that a $25,000 gift is appropriate to start at age 50. Now, we all know there are exceptions. There are young millionaires. There are many, especially arts organizations, have young donor clubs where they try to encourage involvement from younger members of the community. But I think it's a valid assumption to, and I think Dove's point is something to keep in mind, is that when we're talking about major donors, we're probably going to be looking at donors who are a bit older. And again, when we look at file analysis and we look at identifying major donor prospects, we're talking about the rule, not the exception, although the exception certainly will exist. So for age-based gifts, let's just touch on this briefly. What attributes do you want to look at to define a segment? Well, age. You probably don't want to spend time contacting or marketing to anyone under age 55. And you probably, if you know age, you probably don't want to spend a lot of time mass marketing to over age 80. The 80s is the decade of change. That's when lifestyles change and sons and daughters tend to take over financial decisions. So 55 to 80 is a good age range for age-based gifts. Probably a good age range for wealth-based gifts as well. Recency of giving, the donor should have made a gift within the past 24 months. They don't have to be current donors, but if it's been more than 2 years since they've given, you probably want to work with your annual fund person to have them come back on board before you start marketing for one of the 8, which would be a planned gift or some type of a major gift. Frequency of giving is most important for age-based gifts, and the average gift size, as we talked about earlier, is not important. Now, for gifts of wealth, we want to look at a couple of factors, and these are some direct mail terms. The length of time on file, LOTLF. How long have they been giving to your organization? That's another measure of affinity, loyalty, and can be used as a way to measure how high in esteem you are held by these donors. And, of course, for a gift of wealth, the largest one-time gift. If a donor can put a comma in their gift, that's important. Maybe they can put 2 commas in their gift. But if a donor can't put a comma in their gift, meaning they can't make a gift over $1,000 through your annual fund efforts, then maybe if we go back to Panos' chart, maybe they're really invested with you, but they don't have the financial capacity, so they would come in as under a 5 on the financial scale, and that might be a better person to market for a planned gift. Total cumulative giving is important to look at. Of course, the largest one-time gift would drive that, but if you look at somebody who's been on your file for 30 years and their cumulative giving is high compared to others, that's a good person to include in your prospect identification for major donors. Wealth rating indicators, we're going to talk about that. That's very important. We'll talk about that next. And then prospect research. What I'm suggesting here is a process of looking at your annual fund file, applying these data analyses, segmenting, marketing, and then identifying and culling out those donors that you want to have individual prospect research done so that you can then meet with them and talk to them about a specific major gift, which is what Phil's going to talk about. So let's talk about those wealth rating scores. I would love to be able to say, could I see a show of hands of those of you who use wealth rating scores? So go ahead, raise your hand. I see some. That's good. For those of you who use wealth rating scores, you'll be familiar with these terms. For others, let's just walk through what's important when you're looking at wealth rating scores. Many organizations and firms, rather, provide wealth rating scores, but I think you'd get some form of each of these scores from whatever firm that you would use. A capacity score. Using a capacity score, the wealth rating service will tell you, based upon everything that they take into account, which are external data variables, information available in public databases, they will tell you that a certain prospect has the capacity to give at a certain level. The propensity score is how much they love you. Some of those other factors that we talked about earlier. When they look at your file, they're going to look at giving history, number of gifts, other areas of involvement, and they will give you a propensity score, which will tell you how likely it is that the donor will make a gift. And then the gift level would be some combination of the capacity and the propensity. Just because a donor has a high capacity, it doesn't mean that they would give that all to you. We'll talk about that in a little bit. I have a suggestion on how to apply the gift level to your organization. But the gift level is usually a combination of propensity, how much they love you, and capacity, how much they are able to give. So when you're using wealth rating scores, those are the 3 things that you want to take into account. So if you've done analysis on your file and you've purchased wealth rating scores, you've done some segmentation, what are the best ways to select the right major donor prospects, those that you want to walk across the bridge from being a series of data points to a person, a face? We're moving here from group marketing to individual marketing. So which prospects do you want to take your time to call, talk to, cultivate, and get to know? I wanted to let you know that I will be stopping to take questions in about 5 or 7 minutes. So if you have questions and you want to type them in now, in a few minutes, Jess will be sharing the questions so that we can provide feedback from this portion of the presentation. So how do you want to use wealth rating scores? Well, one of the ways that you want to use wealth rating scores could be that you have a group of non-donors. So you can just basically forget everything I said about giving history if you're looking at non-donors. If you're at a university and you have non-donors, if you're in a healthcare institution, you have grateful patients who are non-donors, you know that you have a tremendous resource pool there. So you want to know who should I be soliciting? Who should I be trying to get to go from not making a gift to my organization to making a gift? And there are really 2 ways that this is done. One is through a daily screening. Many healthcare organizations, and right now it's recommended best practice by the advisory board company, is that you take your inpatient nightly census and send it out for wealth rating. and that way you know the financial capacity of those patients who are in your hospital. It does not violate HIPAA because you're allowed to know that that person is there, and you are purchasing external data, which you're allowed to do. So at that point, the development officer can go visit, say hello, take a newspaper, a flower, a parking pass, whatever. And you're doing that on a nightly basis, and this is a service that many well screening companies offer. The other way to do it is a batch screening. If you're not, if you don't have a change of population nightly like a hospital, if you're a university, you could batch up your non-donors and send them out for well screening on a batch basis, which means you're taking a large number, sending them out, and getting the results back. For organizations that are direct mail intensive, perhaps environmental organizations, service organizations, the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, organizations like I used to work for, healthcare organizations like Osteoporosis Foundation or USO, where you don't have that defined constituency, where you're doing direct mail acquisition, you're probably going to use wealth rating after someone has donated a few times. So that would be a different use of the wealth rating scores, and that would be to determine how much are you going to ask for. So one way is to determine who we're going to talk to, who we even want to include in our solicitation, and the other is to determine what is the ask level. Now, I mentioned that I had some thoughts about how to use wealth rating scores, and actually I was meeting with a gentleman who worked for a nonprofit in Washington, D.C., and we were talking about wealth rating scores, and he said, Tim, I have a formula I use. Whenever I get wealth rating back on donors, I have a formula. And I think this is important because many times, and maybe this has been your own experience, that you purchase wealth rating and you put your own name in, or somebody in the office shows up as a millionaire, and you say, these things aren't right. They just don't work. And that's a very important point. When you're purchasing data and you're relying on a company who has a good formula to take this publicly available data, synthesize it in a way for each individual that gives you an idea about where they might fall in terms of wealth, that's exactly what it is. It's their idea. So it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be some miscues, and that's why we'll talk about how you want to qualify those donors then who fall into your major donor pool based upon analysis and gift ask, and wealth rating. But the formula, he said, Tim, whenever I see that they say that an individual donor can make a gift of, let's just pick a number. When they say that somebody can give $1 million, I use the formula. So here it is. He said, first I divide by 5. Then I divide by 5 again. And then I divide by 2. So you got it? It's divide by 5, divide by 5, divide by 2. I said, okay, help me understand it. You got me. He said, well, number one, I divide by 5 because most wealth rating scores, when they give you a gift, a propensity rating, and a suggested gift ask level, is for a 5-year pledge. He said, and I don't want a 5-year pledge. I want a 1-year major gift. So the first thing I do is divide by 5. I said, okay, what's the next divide by 5? He said, well, I figure that they're going to support 4 other charities, and I'm going to be 1/5 of what they're able to give, so I divide by 5. So far that makes sense to me. Once a 1-year gift, acknowledges that there are other charities, so divide by 5, divide by 5. So why do you divide by 2? He said, because I figure they're only half interested. So whatever formula you use, I encourage you not to take wealth rating scores at face value, but to understand that when it comes back that Joe Smith or Mrs. Smith is able to give $1 million, that's for total charitable giving, and that's why we spent time talking about affinity. How much does Mrs. Smith love you, and how much of that $1 million is going to come your way? So remember, don't take them at face value. Make sure that you use some type of formula. So when we have wealth rating scores, I think that it's a logical next step to use the phone before you would just pull up outside their front door for a meeting, because our goal here is to identify major donor prospects and get to a face-to-face meeting. But these are some slides that were put together by a client of mine that I share with you, Gordon Smith at National Jewish Medical Center in Denver, Colorado. It's only through the phone that you can ultimately determine if the donor is qualified and motivated to consider a major gift. Now, I agree with that, and I'll tell you why. You can send an email, you can send a letter, and you will get some responses back. But when you talk with someone, just as you know when you use the phone you pick up the phone to call a donor, they need to respond. It's a two-way conversation. So you can find out, do they have philanthropic intent for your organization? How important do they consider you in the community? Do they find not only you important, but your current case, do they find that important? And do they have a passion for making a gift, and are they ready now? These are things that you can determine through phone conversations with these donors that come out with a high ranking in the wealth screening process. So at this point, Jess, I have completed all the material that I had prepared, but I'm wondering, are there any questions?
There are some questions. I'll jump right in. The first question is, which wealth rating resource have you had the best success with?
I've had good success with many wealth rating companies, and I hesitate to give one endorsement, but I know that if you wanted to check a few out, Wealth Engine is very good, and Blackbaud also has a wealth rating service. But if you have the opportunity to attend conferences, I would suggest walking through the vendor area and talking to the different wealth rating companies, because depending upon which organization asks the question, it might be size dependent. If you have a very large file, a very small file, each of the different organizations have different ways that they work with different file sizes. So the way they put together scores, in my opinion, is only slightly different, but the way they work with clients is what you want to ask.
Excellent. Another question we have is, are there any free resources for wealth screening?
None that I know of, not the way we're talking about. If you wanted to do individual prospect research on one individual, that's not redundant, is it? If you wanted to do research on one individual, yes, you could go to the web and you yourself could look into publicly available records. But to have a file screened and to get an ordinal ranking, which is really what a P2G, a propensity to give score is, what a capacity score is, I don't know of any free resources.
Another question we have is, what is the cost and or what should an organization budget for prospect research?
There are organizations, and Phil, I think, is probably more aware of this than I am, but I know in healthcare there's an organization called the Advisory Board Company that has published research that will say, based upon where your major giving program is, you have different benchmarks. So if you're just starting a major giving program, your prospect research budget is going to be different, and in my opinion, allocated differently than if you have a robust program. If you're just starting out, you're probably going to spend more money on screening, on large applications of wealth rating, whereas if you're a more robust program, you're going to be sending individual names out to get prospect research reports back. So I think it depends on where your program is, how well developed it is. In terms of what dollars and cents should you put to it, I think with everything you should contact the wealth screening company, let them know how large your file is, let them know what you want to do, whether it's nightly basis, a batch basis, and they'll certainly provide a proposal for you to help you with your budgeting.
Okay. I'm going to combine a couple of the questions because we have a kind of a major theme going on. And you already addressed a little bit of this. Is just, can you recommend an organization or several organizations that do these wealth rating scores? What is the process, and what is the general cost?
The general cost is based on file size, and it's generally on a per thousand basis. So, again, you would need to contact the company because they have the expertise and they would be able to provide a proposal for you. As far as the process it generally is that you, in your organization, pull together the records that you want to have screened, and then the company will provide you with a way to transfer that data to them. These days, most companies will probably work with a secure FTP website, and privacy is important here. And so you want to make sure that the company that you work with is able to adhere to the standards that you have for data privacy with your organization. So your IT person will want to be involved, and that would be a question that you would want to ask as part of the selection process. Once all that's worked out, you transfer the data to them. They will apply the screening, add fields to your file, and send it back to you, again, through a secure process. And I hope that was what the question was intended, was as in what the process of how does the well screening occur. I want to come back to that, but then in terms of the names of the firms, that they're the same ones that I had mentioned before. I would look at Wealth Engine, Blackbaud, and then one that I didn't mention before was Martin Lundy and Grenzenbach Gleer. They all have different versions of wealth rating. Now, probably what wasn't asked, or maybe was or was not intended as part of that question, the biggest part of the process is what do you do with it when you get it back? I've worked with clients who have taken 3 years to develop the perfect process, internal process, to use the wealth rating scores. And if you've done wealth rating, maybe that's happened within your organization. The important thing is that you do something. There is no perfect answer. If you wait for the perfect way to apply wealth screening, again, because this is screening that is done on a large-scale basis. Once you call up a donor and talk with them, or once you call a donor, excuse me, and talk with them, now you have a one-to-one relationship, and that's when it gets to the point where what Phil's going to talk about is what's really important in stewarding the donor, finding out their level of involvement, making a presentation for a major gift, and ultimately having them make a major gift. But the equally important part of the process is what are we going to do with the scores when we get them back? And that's something to make sure that you have worked out before you undertake a process like this.
Tim, can I jump in for a moment?
Please do.
I think one of the earlier questions had to do, does anyone do this for free? And actually, I think maybe one thing we are missing is that you still want to have your own screening group when you get into these major gifts campaigns or capital campaigns. And by that I mean the committee that you bring together, that you school on confidentiality, but that reviews your prospects and shares information that's appropriate with their current ability to make a gift. So you still have to do your own homework, and you have to qualify these people for your own organization. The screening tools are wonderful, and they allow us to push lots of names into the queue, but they don't necessarily deliver the type of information that's going to have you the next day make the call and say, I'd like to sit down and talk to you. You still have to qualify these people within your own community.
That's an excellent point, and I think that dovetails perfectly with that. One of the most important parts of the process is what you do with the data when you get it back, and I think that's what I hear you saying, Phil. It's how you apply the scores, and that goes even into campaign application as to where you have a campaign committee and you use the scores as a tool, and you have to have the process in place. You can, and maybe you know stories, maybe it's your own organization, you can spend a lot of money on well scores and then have them just sit there, and you definitely want to guard against that.
I agree.
Right. Another question that we have, maybe just kind of specifies this just a little bit more, is there a difference for smaller organizations? What are some options for them for purchasing wealth data?
Well, certainly data purchase is somewhat volume driven, but I would encourage the questioner to be in touch with some of these organizations, do a web search, because as technology has become more robust, there are firms that will and do work with smaller organizations. Again, defining a small organization is probably defining, what is a major gift, which I know you're going to do, Phil. But depending on how small. There is a point where if we're talking a couple of hundred names, it's probably not worth it, and it is worth having a volunteer come in and go out online and do some individual prospect research. But with the cost economies that I've seen in some of the clients I've worked with, you can get down into several thousand records and still have a screening be relatively cost efficient. But that's part of the due diligence of checking out each company and their services and what it is that they offer. If you find yourself in the position that you're too small, or even what someone else might consider relatively inexpensive isn't for you, it's just cost prohibitive, I would encourage you to go back to what we talked about developing an internal score. That could be another free application. If you sit down with your PR person or the person who coordinates the service provision within your organization, and you put together 4 or 5 key points, including donations, use of service, volunteering, and you add a score, and you develop a scoring method, you can do that internally, and that doesn't cost any money. And it's better than not doing anything.
Right. Would you like to take some more questions or move on and take some more later?
I think we could take more questions later. I think, Phil, if you want to take it from here.
I just want to remind everybody, I'm sorry about that, Phil. I just want to remind everybody that if you have a question in the queue and you would like to ask another question at the end of the presentation or throughout Phil's presentation, you can just click on that Q&A box and click on Edit, and that will allow you to add to the current question you have or delete it and replace it with a new question.
And Jessica, I see some questions here that are pretty quick hits, so at the end of the presentation, if we have time, I could answer about 3 or 4 of these really quickly. So if you've asked a question and we haven't gotten to it yet, there are some here that I'm sure that we'll be able to answer pretty quickly. But I would like to conclude this portion of questions and let Phil present his material at this time, if that's okay.
Great.
Sounds great. Thanks,
Phil.
Tim. Thanks, Jess. So, hello, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be with you. I thought I would tell you one thing about my section of this is that I want to be very pragmatic as we go forward and get into some very specific techniques and information. So keep that in mind. I also wanted you to know the sources that I went to. And while this is based on my experience with major gifts and my reading of different material, it's certainly my interpretation. But I've listed on this first slide some of the key areas or key resources that I went to develop this presentation. And I wanted to point out for those in Canada, and I realize we have quite a few of them, that I use the Motivators and Barriers to Philanthropic Giving by Entrepreneurs. That was developed as actually part of their master's presentation by Guy Malabone and Tony Myers. I'm not sure how available that resource is. It is a lengthy piece of work, but it's excellent, and it really interfaces very well with other studies that have been done. But I would encourage you to certainly feel free to get a hold of Guy or Tony, and I'm sure they would share it. But I didn't do a very full web search on that to see how it's been presented in other places. So I have an overarching comment that I would like to begin with. And this has to do with the fact that as I listen to our governments, as I listen to individuals, there seems to be for lack of a better term, a wealthism that has developed in North America about people who have resources and what our expectations are of them. And so here would be my overarching comment. We need to revere our prospects and our donors. They are likely not only to be the major contributors to your organization, but to other organizations as well. And in not showing a deference for them making decisions and giving our organizations consideration that are based on goodwill might have negative results for many organizations. So I feel like sometimes we are very assuming about what our major gift prospects should do and not very understanding about what they're trying to do. So what is a major gift? I think that's a question we all look to, and I found what I think is a very reasonable definition by Kent Dove, and it applies to whatever size your organization is. Again, it's a model. It doesn't maybe fit everyone right, but it gives us some ability as we're working with boards or with committees to say, here's what a major gift might be for us. And so Dove offers that you take your top 10 to 20% of gifts, so we're talking gift size, that are received by an organization, and they account for 70 to 80% of the annual income. So 10 to 20% level gifts, top gifts, and that should equal 70 to 80, maybe 90% of your gift income, and that low figure in that range would begin your major gift level for your organization. But also keep in mind, with some deference to your donors, that they might each have their own idea of what a major gift is for them. And so one of the things we want to explore as we have our meetings with them is what is that major gift level for them. And it might be surprisingly high, and it might be surprisingly or disappointingly low. So I'm going to talk about two types of major gift donors, the traditional major gift philanthropist and then the venture philanthropist. When we talk about the major gift donors in the traditional sense, I would encourage you to, if you haven't read it, to read it, and if you haven't read it for a while, to revisit it. The 7 Faces of Philanthropy, which was done by Prince and File, I think almost 16 years ago now, but it was based on a series of surveys of people with wealth, and then their own survey, which I believe involved over 200 major gift donors in the United States, but I do think in this case it's applicable to Canada as well. So what are these trademarks or maybe stereotypes of the major gift philanthropist in the traditional role? And one is that we would say that they tend to be religious. They may not participate in religion, but they do have a sense of a religious tradition. It may be part of their motivation or part of their expectation for giving, and we see this often in our major gift prospects. A second item is that in many cases they're self-made. Sometimes there is family wealth, but many of our major gift philanthropists are self-made, and because of that they feel an obligation to give back. Third is that there is a tradition of giving. That might be from the family, that might be from their friends, it might be just the type of community that they are from, but there is a sense of I ought to be participating in helping organizations in this community. Then they believe in people, they have a strong belief that they can help people. Next, they're community-centered. They're proud of the community they live in. They feel an obligation to participate, and they want to be there for their community. Now, I'm going to mention something here that I think is of interest that one of my major gift benefactors has told me, and that is when people move from your community, it might be to warmer climes or they relocate at the end of their career, they generally take their philanthropy and their venture capital with them. I thought this was an interesting point, so I started looking at some of those people that used to be among our major gift donors and had permanently moved from our community. And the truth is, the vast majority of them, at some point, stopped giving to us. They may have given to us for a few years, but it dwindles and then it goes away, even though we continue to try to see them, visit them, and keep materials in front of them. Lastly, and maybe most importantly, these traditional major gift philanthropists have similar values with your organization. And this is something you want to pay a great deal of attention to. It'll save you a lot of work in not trying to get a gift from someone who doesn't share your values, and it'll make getting gifts from individuals that you do have similar values with much easier. So look for the values that they manifest. You can see this in their past giving, and we'll talk more about that in a few slides, but they're very important to be matching your values. Now, venture capitalists, we don't know as much about, but we're seeing patterns. And one of the things that we see is that they bring principles from their business practice and they apply it to their philanthropy. They believe that the best investments require more than money. They're very interested in collaboration. They're very interested in social impact. They are very interested in the outcomes. So as you work with some of these people, you need to be talking about these things as you're starting to cultivate them for the gift. Who are you going to collaborate with? How is this going to impact the community from a social standpoint? And what are going to be the specific outcomes they're going to see when they join you in addressing the issue that you want them to work on? They are not interested in writing a check and walking away. They want to be involved. On the other hand, they may not respond to invitations to serve on a community board. They're not necessarily joiners, and they may not necessarily want to go to a black tie dinner or something that you think that you've done with your traditional philanthropist. So what I'm suggesting here is that it is important to identify the type of philanthropist you're dealing with, the prospect, and to be able to engage them in an appropriate way. I don't know if you're familiar with Stanford Health in South Dakota, but they are a long-standing organization in healthcare. But in the earlier in this decade, they actually in the past decade, they received a $400 million gift from an individual, and so they're now called Stanford Health. And he made his money in the investment world. And what he said, I thought was very interesting. I'm an investor. That is what I do. So it is my nature to evaluate return on investment in everything I do. With philanthropy, it's no different. So as we close out this first look at the types of philanthropists that we're going to be working with, I thought having Mr. Sanford's words up there might help you better understand. So what are some trends in some other trends to consider? The market is global, and you have to consider who and how you might solicit from another country. And there are some good works out there that you might find helpful. John Dobozinski has written one on philanthropy in a flat world. Bernard Ross makes presentations quite frequently in this country and has some wonderful ideas about this. And I believe Judith Nichols has also talked about in one of her recent books, Global Philanthropy. A second thing to keep in mind are women. They are ever increasing their share of the world's wealth. They are more likely to volunteer, and as you know, volunteers are more likely to give, and they live longer, so they inherit the wealth. Again, there are many resources here, Women in Philanthropy, and there are publications that you can get for free, and I would encourage you to make sure that you are keeping an eye on which women might be ones that you should be including in your prospects. And lastly, we know that people of color want to be very involved in addressing needs in their communities. a resource for this, Janice Galpetti has done a nice book. It's a part of the AFP development series, I believe, and it's called Cultivating Diversity in Fundraising. Janice Galpetti did that. So, Jess, I can stop and answer any questions before I move into a much more pragmatic section here, if there are any there.
There are some questions, and some of these may float back into part of what Tim's presentation was, so just let me know if you want to skip any. A question we have is, how do we honor or thank major donors without overwhelming them? And is there such a thing as contacting them too much?
That's a great question. First of all, I think the best way to honor them is to ask them for what they would like. And it may surprise you. You know, oftentimes I hear, I really don't want any recognition. And you have to make sure that that's really what they're saying. It may be, I don't want any public recognition. It may be that I don't want they may be saying, I don't want other organizations to solicit me. So I think you need to kind of probe that a little bit. But I would say this, you always need to find a way to say thank you in a genuine and a meaningful way. So not giving any recognition is not acceptable. Giving recognition that is relatively private, that doesn't cause a big splash, is absolutely appropriate. You just need to work with the donor to make sure you understand what they would like in terms of recognition. Unfortunately, I can tell you that I've had circumstances where I took the donor at their word and later found out that they were hurt, that they didn't get more recognition. Or they saw that someone else who made a similar sized gift got a lot of recognition, and then it did become important to them. So you need to clarify, and you need to go back to them several times and say, are you interested now in receiving some recognition for this? Did I answer this? Was there a second part to that, Jess, that I missed?
I believe you got it all, but let me review it really quick for you. Is there such a thing as contacting them too much? Was
yes.
The second part of that?
Well, I think the obvious answer is yes. And they will usually tell you, but you know, we have some questions that as we bring people in, we start to ask them, are there publications that you especially like? You know, we tested out how many times would you like to be contacted a year? We probably contact them a little bit more. And it might be who and how you're contacting them. We're fortunate to have a retired surgeon who works with us, and he does phone calls to all kinds of people, and it has great impact, and it's not intrusive. He just calls them to say, this is Doctor, and I'm calling to say thank you for your recent gift, and it's a 30-second call that makes a huge difference to these people. So maybe if you have that key volunteer or dignitary that can do something for you once in a while, that might go a long way.
All right. I think the other questions we have are related to wealth screenings or wealth ratings. Do you want to hold those until the end?
Please.
Okay.
All right.
We can move forward.
So as I said, we're going to get more pragmatic now. So this next section is just talking about getting the appointment. And I'm assuming that we're talking about some individuals that we think we could make a significant gift to our organization and that may have been giving to us, but now we want to move them to the next level. Or it may be somebody in the community that we know is interested in us, and we just haven't made the connection yet. So the first part of this is the who, and who's the best person to make that contact with the individual. And I would tell you to be broad in your thinking. It could be a friend who is currently one of your volunteers, a friend of the individual who's willing to make the call and introduce you. It could be that you have a relationship with someone in the company and that person could go to this individual and say, I'd like you to meet with the organization that I support and hear what we're trying to do in this area. Or it may be a member of your board and they don't know, but at least you're matching a person with a certain regard with this other individual, so they'd be more likely to take the call. When that individual is going to make the contacts, what you need to have are potential dates and times in hand. You need to be willing, you need to say to them very clearly, because you do not want to waste time, we have some time on this date and on this date, and would these work for you? The next thing is to state very clearly what you want and how much time you need, and to keep it simple. Now, this actually has a great benefit for the organization and the people who are going to be involved in the visit, and that is that you're already defining the purpose of the visit, and therefore there are no surprises. It can relax your anxiety, and it can make it easier for the person to do that. And then whoever's making this contact needs to be ready for a deflection. And a deflection is, I don't have any time this month. And the individual needs to say, well, I understand that, and we're happy, we're patient. Is there another time of the day or evening? Can we look at a time that will be available in March? And just gently go back at it and see if you can't get that time set. And lastly, in all cases, be positive, be enthusiastic, and be grateful. We are asking people for their consideration of this, and you just need to be positive and enthusiastic and grateful. And I think most times you'll find that has great benefit. So let's say we have the appointment now, and we are going to do a pre-planning visit. Now, depending on who this is with and how big your staff is, this might be something you do alone. It might be something you do with another member or two of your development team, or it might even include, if you're in a campaign mode, some volunteers. But the first thing you want to do is you want to take and review anything you have on this donor in their file and any other information you can gather on a prospect. It might be looking at the annual reports of other organizations in your community that you know they've supported. It might be doing a Google search. It might be going to newspaper archives and that sort of thing. What you're looking for, values, as I mentioned earlier, values are what's going to drive the gift. So if they're manifesting values that seem very similar to the types of things you're involved in, that's very, very important. Life circumstances. Did someone recently lose a member of their family? Did they have a big promotion? Did they sell the company? Are they retiring? You need to be aware of that. Are they moving out of the community? The donor's past intentions or interest, what they've done for your organization or other organizations, what particular interests they have in their life. I have a person I'm working with now who has a great interest in homeless veterans, and it's involved in every one of our conversations. It is a passion for him, and I don't want it to be a roadblock for our gift, so we actively encourage him to talk to us about what he wants to do and how he's going to accomplish that. And then, again, going with the well screening, that you want to know financial resources. All of this has to be very discreet, but it is something that you want to know something about. I point out that oftentimes people will share with the people making the call information that maybe they haven't even shared with their family. So they tend to be quite disclosing, and I think you need to be very, very confidential in what you hear and not using it in other conversations. Lastly, or not lastly in this pre-planning visit, but you want to determine, first of all, maybe who's going to be there, but also what the roles of the participants are going to play. And again, you don't want to overwhelm with too many people in the room. It also makes the situation more complex as the different things. But if you're going to meet with a couple or an individual, it may be that you want to have 2 or 3 people, but you need to know who's going to do the introductions, who's going to talk about the case for support, and who is going to make that ask. So then I think it's good to, at least in this pre-planning session, to, in theory, divide the time for the visit into segments. So how much time are we going to do in just talking about whatever our icebreaker is, and then how much time are we going to talk about what we're trying to accomplish and what the impact of this will be on the community. And then lastly, how much time are we going to allocate for the ask. And you also then want to discuss specifics on how you're going to transition through these segments, giving the person who's going to be carrying that part of the conversation the key words that he or she needs to move to the next topic and hand it off to the colleague. Know when you're going to move to the ask, know what you're going to be asking for, and know who will request the gift. So, how do I manage this visit? Well, we've talked about this plan, but the fact is that the plan has to be flexible. You have to be diligent, and you have to know what you're trying to accomplish. But it's not unusual that there's going to be some degree of anxiety or anxiousness or nervousness in the room. And so sometimes we get people who talk and they're talking about non-related things. And so you have to be gentle, let that happen, but draw the person back to the purpose for the visit. Be prepared for some different scenarios. And this may go as far, hopefully not, because you've done a lot of prep work, as having to say, you know, it might be better if we visit at a different time. But I would say that's generally the big exception. I think the hardest issue is that you spend so much time in the first part of the conversation that the time for making the case and especially making the ask, which doesn't take long, gets squeezed, and all of a sudden it becomes a feeling of panic. So I'm suggesting that we provide time for what I'm calling setting the table, and that might be discussing issues of relevance, which might be family, job and business, background. Again, you're listening here. You're asking simple questions, and then you're listening and you're observing. And while you want to maintain good eye contact, I think it's also important to see, you know, are there religious icons in the home or in the office? Are there pictures of children and grandchildren and things like that? They will help guide this first part of the conversation, and they may even give you points to reference as you're talking to the person. By all means, avoid irrelevant topics. You know, if it were today or yesterday, being a Green Bay fan, I would not want to talk about the Super Bowl, even though I really want to talk about the Super Bowl. And have some materials that provide context, that you can put those down. And I wouldn't suggest portfolios of materials. A few things that you can give them, especially things that may have pictures that fewer words and more photos that show what you're trying to accomplish. I said pack a few stories to set the stage. This is something that, again, John Dobosinski in his book says that every organization should have a chief storytelling officer. I think that's a marvelous concept. You know, the best thing we can do is not talk about ourselves, but talk about the stories that the people who benefit from our services share with us. And you don't want a lot of these. You don't want them to be lengthy, but they certainly can set the tone and effectively position you for an ask. So don't let that story dominate, but have a couple that, in the right circumstance, you think, let me share something with you that I heard last week from one of our donors or from one of our patients. And then within limits and not too broad, ask if the donor has questions about the project. So we are in the process of building a new hospital. And if I ask them, what have you heard about our new hospital? I could be asking them to comment on how much money we're spending, on why we're doing it now, why aren't you remodeling, etc. And you really don't want to get caught in those discussions. So I might be more appropriate to say, are you aware of our great need for a patient library? And you again are trying to get them to focus. And then this is repetition, but have a specific scenario and language that's for the ask. So I'm going to move to the ask here, and we've set the table. I'm sorry. There are some other things that I didn't mention here. This idea of setting the table, I'm going to continue on that. Make sure you have time to make the ask, and asking involves this. It's confirming that the case for support is understood. It's making sure that relevant questions are answered, that you're calmly stating what you would like from the donor, for what purpose, and in what time period, and then waiting for his or her response without interruption, confirming the response and discussing the next steps. And regardless of the outcome, we're going to say a sincere thank you. So that's when we're getting to the point of that transition. This is what's going to be included in the ask. So don't think of it as, would you make a gift of? It really starts with confirming that the case for support is understood, and it carries right through to the final thank you. Now I'll go to the ask. So based on your pre-meeting planning, you should have determined how you're going to move to the ask, and when the stage is set, distinctly and clearly say what the gift will accomplish and the amount you're requesting. And then be still, allowing the donor to speak next. And I'm going to repeat that because I think it's the thing that most often keeps these from happening. You want to be still and allow the donor to speak next. If the donor says yes, you want to say thank you. You want to restate the impact of the gift upon your organization. Make sure that you go right back to him and tell them the same thing that you told them setting up the ask, that this is going to make a huge difference. Then confirm the amount of the gift. And if it's appropriate, if you circumstances, and usually it is, this isn't such a caveat of if appropriate, but discuss any arrangements for documenting the commitment and making payments. And then confirm next steps and explore that recognition, which hopefully you will have said to them, we would like you to consider, and you'd have that recognition package ready for them. And here again, I think once they've said ask, sometimes we're so eager to pack our bag at that point and move out of the office. I certainly don't want you to overstay or abuse the time that's been set aside, but don't rush to get out the door. If the donor says no, you also say thank you. Remain positive. Depending on the circumstance, you may ask if there is interest in participating at another level. You may simply ask if there's another area of interest, or you may simply ask if you could follow up in a week or two. Don't take the no as the door being closed completely. And many times the donor himself will say, or herself will say, I just can't, I want to help you and I will help you, but I can't do it at this level. And then you need to negotiate what that level is. Then you need to complete, when you get back to the office, or if you have your recorder with you and you get to your car, you need to complete a contact report. This is very, very important information, and it's something that you want to make sure, as you explain it to your staff who are going to implement this, whether it's in accounting or recognition or where, that the records are very clear. So include the objective comments and observations from the meeting, review the process and the outcome of the meeting, and state the next steps with the donor. Then you need to write a note and thank the donor for the visit and their consideration. So I'm going to finish this before we move to questions, because I want to make sure that we have time for questions. Here are some benchmarks that I think may be of help to you. We all have different sized staffs. We have different numbers of constituents. Some of us have older organizations, some have younger, and our software support is stronger or less strong. So I think these are factors for establishing your own benchmarks: the size of the staff and the number of constituents, the ability of staff to focus only on major gifts. So many of us are split between major and planned gifts, or major gifts and some annual gifts and things like that, because our organizations are smaller. If that's the case, you need to accommodate that as you assign people to work with the different major gift prospects. You want to have a good knowledge of your organizational database and the support staff that can generate the information you need. Your staff members' tenure and expertise. So how long have they been with the organization? How well do they know some of these prospects? What's their expertise level in working with major gifts? Your organization's volunteer and leadership structure. Those are all things that should factor into establishing the benchmarks. So then, based on that information, I think you want to determine the number of prospects that are going to be in each individual's portfolio, and they will vary. The number of contacts that you're expecting per prospect. How many times are we going to connect with them? You need to define what a contact is, too. The number of visits that you're going to have per prospect, and again, you need to determine what a visit is. Is a visit a long phone call? Is a visit only in person? Is a visit a follow-up with the person's financial advisor that they've said, I'd like you to talk to this person about what you're proposing? All those things need to be done so that when we evaluate our staff, we have clear understanding of what we're expecting, and so do they. And then the anticipated number of gifts. And obviously for a newer person, it's probably going to be a lower number, and for a more seasoned person, it's going to be a higher number. And lastly, as my colleague and chief of our staff tells me, if there's not a call report, the call did not take place. I think a good benchmark for us all to live by, and to really make sure that we're completing these reports so that we know where we're going. So a couple final questions, kind of going back to the theme at the beginning. And remember, as a professional fundraiser, we need to be discreet and confidential with the information that is shared with us. We need to behave ethically and abide by our professional standards. We need to treat our donors and our prospects the way that you would like to be treated. And then remember that our true responsibility is to help these individuals make meaningful and thoughtful gifts that benefit the community. Jess, that concludes my section, and I am happy, and I'm sure Tim is too, to take any questions.
All right. One of the first questions we have is, if the answer is no, would you ask about who else they might recommend contacting?
Probably not. That seems to me that I mean, you're then asking for another prospect, and that might feel a little bit more like I'm caught in the chase. I'm only after getting money for this project, and I'd much rather explore what opportunities I might have with the no to make it a yes. And I don't think that's their job. Excuse me. I don't think that's their job to be a prospect researcher for us.
All right. Another question we have is, can you elaborate on negotiating the level if the donor initially says no?
Sure. I was with someone last week, and I asked him for a gift, a six-figure gift, and he said that he would like to make a six-figure gift, but at this time he didn't feel he could. And what I did then was say to him, if you gave me a range of what you could do for us over the next 5 years, what would that be? And he went to a low figure of $50,000, and that allowed us to move into a conversation of that focused on his gift over the next 5 years of between $50,000 and $100,000. And we actually moved up towards the $100,000 mark again, but it just took some time to do that.
All right. Another question we have is, people are savvy and know why you're calling. You said to be prepared for a deflection, so can you share some of your best tips for getting an appointment for a face-to-face meeting?
Well, my best tip is to have the right person get the meeting and also to arrange for the meeting. And in that case, sometimes, and I've been at this organization for nearly 20 years, so I know most of the major gift prospects and donors quite well, but I also know their help, or yeah, the people that they work with. And so sometimes when I know the person's been very busy, I simply call their assistant and say, I want to come in, I want to talk about a specific project we're working on. I'll tell the person the project, and he or she will really work to get me a time that's appropriate. And I give them a clear understanding of what I'm there for and how much time I need.
Phil, if I could jump in, based on discussions you and I have had, I just wanted to stress that last point. You're very straightforward about why it is you're going to meet them.
Absolutely, because it reduces my stress dramatically, and it also it sets the level that or the topic, so they know. And you might as well say it because they know you're not coming there to talk about how their pet's doing. Is there another question, Jess?
There is another question. Another question is, please provide example of what you would say to the donor when you're setting up the appointment. Can you role play so we can hear how and what exactly you would say, as the person said this is the hardest part for them?
Well, first of all, I agree. I think it's almost as difficult as the ask. So I understand that. So what would I say? Ideally, if there was, if I could do it on the phone directly, so that I would want to say to the person, Mary, this is Phil Schumacher from the foundation. We are in the midst of seeking some support for blah, blah, blah. I would really like to have the opportunity to sit down with you and talk about this in the near future, get some of your ideas on what you think about this project, and also see if you'd be interested in supporting us for the project. And she may say back to me, Phil, I have so much on my plate right now. I really would like to hear, but I'm not sure that I can do anything in the near future. And I can say a couple of things. I'd say, well, Mary, what if we didn't worry so much about what you can do, but you just let me give you an update on this, and then I'll set another time when we can talk about your participation. Or I might say, Mary, I understand, and my calendar is looking much better in April. I'm wondering about yours, and could we find a time that I'll contact you in early April and see if we can meet in mid-April.
Okay. Another question we have is, what are your suggestions for conducting donor research?
Well, first of all, I agree with everything that Tim said, and just my only caveat on that is that oftentimes we get information from our wealth screening, and we know that somebody has a lot more capacity than what the screen shows because these people have private companies, or maybe they have things that they can kind of keep off the record, and or they have people that show up very high in their well screening, but the well screening doesn't know that they're supporting a grandchild with severe autism, and that it's taking thousands and thousands of dollars out of their income every year. And right now that is both emotionally and financially having impact on them. So I think the degree to which you can pull that small committee together of individuals, or you make a call and, if you know someone who knows this person pretty well, and just say, I don't want to be intrusive. If you'd be kind enough to share something, I'm going to ask you about Mary, and this is the reason why. I'd like to approach her about a gift, but I don't want to do it if you think that she's not ready because of circumstances.
There's a couple, Phil, if I could just approach that from a different direction. There are a lot of online resources these days, so if the purpose of the question is, what are some tools I can do to do individual prospect research? I think piggybacking off of what you said, Phil, talking to individuals who know the person and finding out that information. But there's a whole host of websites, Facebook, LinkedIn, and some of the more traditional Hoovers provide some corporate information, hoovers.com. But these days, you could type a Google question for just about anything. There's websites for California attorneys. So as you're looking at an individual, you obviously want to know what their interests are, and then you can research those through some ready available web sources. Again, that's if the nature of the question is, how do I do online research for an individual donor prospect? But screening committees and talking to individuals who know them, again, who have been definitely coached and schooled in confidentiality, as Phil stressed, and I would stress again, but using your volunteer screening committees is probably one of the most important things.
Thanks, Tim. Good points.
All right, another question we have is, if you are new at an organization and are still making first introductions to major donors who have seldom had staff contact with the organizations, how long do you wait before you make an ask? If your organization is facing financial difficulties, would this change things?
Well, my first comment would be that even though I know this isn't the case for support, but financial exigency is not a good reason to force an ask. I think you need to know that the relationship is at a point that the person will be open to receiving an ask, and you may need to speed up the amount of cultivation you're doing and the amount of awareness. And there are some simple ways to do that. Oftentimes, bringing people in and showing them firsthand what you're trying to accomplish with your organization is very meaningful, and it can move the process along very quickly. And in the course of that, maybe as you're closing out that meeting, you might want to say to them, could I give you a call in a week or two, and we could maybe talk about some of your reaction to what you saw today and whether or not you'd be able to assist us in doing that. So I would probably say newness can be an excuse, and I'm not suggesting that it always is, but I think you can move the process along rather quickly. And it may not be, you might not be able to be as comfortable in the process, but that's what we're being asked to do, and I think I like asking a person that I've known for a long time more than it's easier anyway than a person that I'm asking for the first time and that I don't know so well. But it's still a matter of doing the right things to prepare for it and then getting it done. I'd also like to just say I work for someone, and one of my colleagues whenever we would meet with the president, he'd always ask where we were with these different prospects, and this individual that I worked with would often say, well, I'm still cultivating. And finally one day he called 3 of us together and said to this individual, where are we with so-and-so? And he said, well, I'm still cultivating. And the president looked at him and said, cultivating, 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 when are we going to harvest? And it is true. We can get caught in the cultivation process and decide and not move to the ask and seeing if we're going to get something that will benefit our organization.
All right, another question we have is, there may be a lot of detailed info supplied by prospects. Can the fundraiser ever take notes during the meeting?
Well, I think if you are going to, it should be about something that the individual told you or a question they raised. So I would ask their permission. I would say, Mary, that's a very interesting question. I don't know the answer. Would you mind if I write it down and I'll get back to you? And if in the process of doing that you wrote down that she seems to really care about young children, I think that would be fine. But I would ask permission to write something down, because I think it sends the message that you're the reporter sort of thing, and I don't think you want that to be the message.
Another question we have is, if you are making a call to an individual you are not familiar with to set up an appointment and that person is not home or in the office, would you leave a message in their voicemail? And if yes, how much detail about your reason for the call would you leave in the message?
I do leave messages, and I try to share with them what I'm calling about without getting into too specific. So it's pretty broad. And I also say, I will call you back tomorrow, or if they say I'm going to be out of town for, or out of the offices, I will say I'll call you at a specific time in reference to what they're telling me.
Okay, we have about a minute until we're through. We can go late if you want to answer some more questions, or we can take these offline. But we do at least have time for one more question, and that is, do you have a recommendation for a resource to develop a comprehensive cultivation plan?
Well, if you're talking about major gift fundraising, I would say that certainly the book Conducting a Successful Major Gift and Planned Gift Giving Program by Kent Dove would be very helpful. But I think if you, again, depending on what organizations you're affiliated with, but I think AFP, AHP, PPP, I mean, they all have materials that are part of the bibliographies that they share with members, and I would also look at those. But Dove is the one that's on my shelf right now.
Okay, and did we want to go back to some of the other questions that we had left behind earlier? I know, Tim, that you said a couple of those were really quick.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you just want me to run down some of them?
Sure, that would be fine.
How long is a wealth screening typically good for? If you go out and Google, how often should I do a wealth screening? And for many of your questions on wealth screening, I'd recommend you do that. How often should I do a wealth screening? You'll see white papers from 2 of the companies that I mentioned. Most of my clients tend to use a wealth screening within 2 years of the time that they get it. Now, that's from the client's perspective. That may not be what the companies recommend, but within 2 years of the time that they get it. Again, how often should you renew the wealth rating? That would be about, well, the companies will recommend how often you refresh. One of them recommends that you do pre-campaign, mid-campaign, and post-campaign. So I think you need to look at how you're using the wealth screening. Obviously, if you're a hospital, you're sending patient information out every night. Please describe your phone qualifying techniques. Those were, if you go back to the slide, those were the questions that I would ask. I would, number one, identify with the donor. If they're a non-donor, talk to them about being alum at the university. If they're a patient, ask them about their patient experience. You want to bond with the donor. But then when you're calling major donors, they understand what's happening in the call. They'll know right away that you're calling to talk about philanthropic support, and you want to ask them, you want to get a sense of how they view you in the community. Are you important, unimportant, very important? And then you want to talk about the case. And then at that point, you would want to ask if they would want to meet with you or if they would want to attend an event. Maybe it's coffee with the president. Maybe it's a tour of the new facility. But if you look at the slide that talked about using the phone, I think if you just go down those bullet points, that's good information and would give you a jumping off point. I think those are most of the ones about the well screening that I see.
Guys want to take a couple more questions now or take those after the event is over individually?
I'm comfortable. I appreciate how many people have stayed on the call, but I'm more than happy to do that. And if people need to drop off, they certainly should. But let's take a few more.
Sounds good. Another question we have then is, if you have a significant donor that you have never met, your only contact is through their secretary, and after several consecutive years of giving, they all of a sudden stop. How would you follow up with them?
Can you repeat the part, Jess, about the secretary?
Yep. What they said was, if you have a significant donor and the only contact you've had with them is through their secretary and they stopped giving, how would you then follow up?
Okay. So if I'm hearing this right, I'm really not, everything I'm directing is through the secretary, and that results in the gift. So I probably would want to be respectful of that process by starting out with the secretary and seeing if he or she knows there's a reason that the individual is stopping. And then depending on what they tell me, it may prompt me to ask that, again, secretary, advisor, whatever, do you think there'd be an opportunity either by me writing a letter directly to this person or by, with your assistance, scheduling an appointment that I can sit down and at least share with them to date what their gifts have, the difference they've made for our organization, and you know, hopefully in that process be either able to continue the relationship or to bring some closure to it and to recognize them for all they've done.
All right. Another question is, in this day and age of cell phones, how do you manage contacting people with unlisted phone numbers? And then there's a second part to that. People who send you a check but no phone number, how would you contact them on a more personal level, assuming nobody on your board knows who they are?
Well, number one is, and Tim, you're going to have a better answer to this than I probably, but number one is there is a lot of information out there, and we can be pretty good at getting numbers. But I would say that one of the most effective things we do is, and it may be somewhat of a lost art, especially with texting and emails and everything like that, is the handwritten note.
Mm-hmm.
And I spend every day I capture some names of people I want to, and before I leave the office at night, I write handwritten notes. I put stamps on them. I deliver them to the post office on my way home, and it opens doors. I get notes back from people telling me thank you for your note. So, and if that can happen, it's not hard to say, could I give you a call sometime? We don't have your phone number. Would you be willing to share it with me?
And I think, obviously, what you're saying, Phil, the handwritten note cuts through mailbox clutter. And so I think that answers the people who send a check. But there's two questions here that are similar. This one, in this day and age of cell phone numbers, how do you manage contacting people without phone numbers? And the last part of a previous question if you don't have the donor's phone number in your files, is it okay to look it up online? Or should you only communicate with donors through channels that they have shared with you? I think early in a relationship, reaching out to a donor is flattering and a good thing. And yes, you can send your file out, certainly, and purchase phone numbers, and reach out by phone, and donors will communicate very quickly if they like or don't like being communicated with by phone. But finding cell phone numbers and finding phone numbers, I think, early in the donor process is certainly acceptable. Once you know a donor, and Phil, you would know more about this than I would, but I think the more you know about a donor, the more you know about how they like to be contacted. And as the relationship grows, then you know whether or not it's okay to reach out by phone. But certainly to find out about a donor initially, yes, I would look up the phone number. And you can look up cell phone numbers. But it's possible to find donors with unlisted numbers. If you work in a healthcare setting, you get that demographic information through patient records. Higher ed, you probably get it through academic records. But I would say as the relationship grows, then it's more permission marketing and how the donor wishes to be contacted.
Okay. We have another question, and it is, the presenter mentioned qualifying a major gift prospect with a phone call. What specific questions would you ask on that phone call that would prompt the prospect to openly discuss their affinity for the organization? It is oftentimes to get the prospects to engage in a two-way conversation. I believe that was a question.
Absolutely. I would say the purpose of picking up the phone anytime is to have a two-way conversation. And you need to be prepared then to respond and to talk to the donor and react. And while that may seem obvious, that's why sometimes it's hard to pick up the phone. When you have 10 calls to make, you just need to have yourself sit down with the phone and call those donors. Because I think most of us like talking to donors, it's just getting to that point. I've had many gift officers say, well, once I get in the living room, I'm fine, just get me into the living room. So it's important to, when you call a donor, to know that you're going to be asking questions and listening. I think a lot of what Phil said for a face-to-face meeting can apply to your initial phone call with a donor. Know what you're going to ask and listen. A lot of times what donors want to talk about is their own experience. If they've used a service of your organization, you can ask them about that. But you do want to then ask how important they think you are, looking at their philanthropic support. How important do they feel that the services you provide are in the community, and then talk about the current case and ask them how important that they view that, and would they be willing to learn more about that. And I think that sounds a lot like some of the things that you said, Phil.
I agree, Tim, and I think those phone calls, you do qualify, and you can probably go back to some of my slides and look at the types of things you want to ask and know about. You know, one of our staff members is quite skilled at saying to an individual, you know, can you tell me your 3 favorite charities? And that's a great question. And it can be done on the phone or it can be done in person. And if they say, you know, number 1 is this, number 2 is this, and you're number 3, then the ability to say, what would it take to move to number 2 for us?
All right, we have 2 more but kind of long questions. So I'm going to get into the first one. Let me know if you need me to repeat any parts of it or if you want to take pieces of it at a time. The first part to this one is, are traditional and venture donors certain ages? What if they decline offers to visit them again, saying, we know what you do, you don't need to spend time with us? I'd say we take those 2 first, and then we'll move on.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've heard that. And unless you have a good reason to say that there's something new, or you know, it might be to simply acknowledge that you know, you're talking about the relationship we've had, and how would you like this to continue in the future, in light of the fact that you're telling me that that the visits aren't necessary. And that might give you the opportunity to say, can I call you once a quarter and just check in, and if there's something that I think would be helpful for you to know, I can share that. If there's any questions you have, I'd be happy to address those. So I think it's sort of a deflection, and how do you embrace what they're saying and at the same time suggest that there might be another way that the relationship continues.
And the first part to that question was, are traditional and venture donors certain ages?
Oh, okay. Well, the answer to that is yes and no. Traditional donors might be relatively young, but they would carry all the way into the 80s, 90s, and maybe a few into the hundreds. And just by the nature of the business, many of the venture philanthropists tend to be younger, but not necessarily. I mean, there are certainly people that have fit that mode for a long time, and we just never approached them differently. And there are certainly people that are very active in venture philanthropy who are well into their 70s and 80s, and they still want to see results. They still want to see collaborations. They still want to see what outcomes are going to be coming. So I think it works both ways, and I wouldn't be too caught up in the age factor.
Okay, another question, or another part to that question was back to the wealth screening, and is, do some firms offer a free trial run of, say, 500 or so of your names to demonstrate what results you might expect?
I don't know if they do, but if you have a large database, I would answer that with how big's your file. If you have a large file, I think you could ask them to. I think if I was the firm, I would ask you to give me all of your records and say, if this meets criteria that you and I agree on, then we'll go ahead and proceed with the rest. But I don't think that it would hurt to ask for a trial run, provided that the outcomes are clearly defined. And if you and the representative of the company can sit down and it works, and then you move forward, I think that would be a reasonable ask, certainly one that wouldn't be dismissed out of hand.
I believe, Jess, that we have Blackbaud and have had them for years, and we started looking at their screening products. I think they did test market it for us. I think they allowed us to put, it might have been exactly 5,000 names in or 2,000 names and run them just to see. And I think, Tim, they allowed us to pre-sort, because I think we wanted to put some people in that we thought might trip them up because of how they handle their wealth. So.
Okay.
So,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, so if you're already using a data processing, a gift processing system that has also a wealth component, you probably have some leverage in asking them to let you sample what they have.
Excellent. Another part of that question was, how many calls generally take place before the ask is made?
Well, I'm hesitating because we're very involved in a major gift portion of a campaign right now, and what we're setting up for are 3. But the constituencies we're working with know us pretty well. Now these are gifts that are 5 and 6, and in some cases 7 figures, but for the most part 5 and 6 figures. And we have a very regimented way of doing this in this particular case, and it starts with a general discussion of what the project is. It could happen as a tour of our facilities, and then that's followed with a call about a brief conversation about what we're trying to accomplish in the campaign, and then the third one is the specific ask. but in some cases we're going from 1 to 3 and not that. In a few cases we've had multiple conversations because of the size of the gift and the fact of the recent economy in the United States.
Okay. And do you want to continue on with questions? Just, keep me queued up and let me know, how long you want to go.
I can probably go in about another 5 minutes, Jess. Then I'm making a presentation to someone about their gift.
And Jess, while we're doing this, for those who are still on with us, do we want to put the survey up for them, or?
I would say let's go ahead and do that, so that way if you want to log off, we do ask that you take a moment to fill this out. It really does go a long way in helping us plan future events, and we certainly appreciate your feedback. And so if we can leave it on that, that will allow people to fill out the survey while we still answer some questions.
Great.
Another question we have is, what are examples of how you have engaged communities of color?
I have to say that in our particular case, which is La Crosse, Wisconsin, the two communities of color that we deal with are Hmong, which is a Southeast Asian community of some numbers, and then we have indigenous people, so Native Americans, and the Hmong population has been one that we've engaged because we have interpreters and we've been able to incorporate them into some of our medical education programs, and actually we now have members of the staff, both nursing and medical, that are from the Hmong community, which is very exciting. In terms of philanthropy, it's been modest, and many times it's been, it certainly has not been major gifts, at least what we would call a major gift. It may be from the individual, but we've had some exchanges of gifts in kinds and things like that, some artwork, and that. With the Native American community, it has been a slower process. It's a very dedicated process that we're trying to do that, but we honestly do not have a lot of engagement at this point. We've just started an outreach program to actually with Stanford Health in the Lakota Porcupine Reservation out in western South Dakota. Yes. So.
Okay, this is the last question that we have in today. It's kind of a little bit of a long one as well. Most approaches to major gifts that I've ever heard take a similar road, which is gently cultivate a donor and approach them through a series of steps that culminate in an ask. Based on the response to that ask, we take an action steps. Are you familiar at all with the Sandler sales technique? The idea that getting to the no quickly so you can immediately filter out prospects who would otherwise be a time drain and focus on those who would be open to a yes? Have you ever heard of a similar approach being applied to major gifts?
I am only familiar with it just from a knowledge standpoint. I've never talked to anyone who's used it, and it may work. It certainly works as a filter. I'm not sure. I see surprises every day in people that I don't expect to make a gift, and they do. So I think if I would base that they weren't going to make a gift on information I received and then tried to confirm it in some way, I'm wondering if my expectation that they're going to say no would only be confirmed, as opposed to if I went in and tried to listen to what their values were and see if there was something that we could match to. Would there be a potential gift available? So I guess I'm not very enthusiastic towards the concept.
And I don't know anything about that particular concept, but or the Sandler sales techniques. But I am wondering that based upon a process of starting with looking at giving, looking at trying to identify the affinity, how much they love the organization, that if you do that right, Phil, you're going to be asking the right people, and you're going to be filtering people out before you get to the personal visit phase.
Great.
All right, gentlemen, that was the last question. Do you have any final remarks before we close out the event today?
Just wish everyone well, and I hope our economies continue to strengthen, and that this has been helpful, and that you're successful in the year ahead.
All right, and if anybody is still on the call who wants to do the survey, we will be leaving this up so that way you can continue to fill it out. I'd like to thank today's speakers, Philip and Tim, and AFP, and I'd like to thank you, our audience, as well for joining us. Thank you, and that concludes today's event.